Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'd just like to take some time to talk about how to look after your Venus flytrap. Many beginners struggle with looking after their Venus flytraps, and even people that have been growing their Venus flytraps for a while may have issues with growing their Venus flytraps. So today we will talk about the 6 tips which I use to look after my Venus flytraps to change your Venus flytrap from looking like this to looking like this. Stick around. When you first get your Venus flytrap, you may be very excited. You may want to just give it as much water as possible, maybe put it straight outside. Maybe you don't have an outside, so you think, okay, maybe it does well inside because they're a jungle plant. All these things are incorrect and correct in some cases. It's very case dependent, but we will cover the 6 tips that I use to look after a Venus flytrap. And at the end of the video, I will give another 3 extra tips which are very important to follow when getting your first Venus flytrap. So when I first got my Venus flytrap, I was about 12 years old. I gotten it from a well-known retail store here in South Africa, a grocery store, and I took it home and I stared at it for hours. I literally stared at this plant for hours, hoping that a flower would land in it, hoping that it would do something. Obviously nothing actually happened, but I was just so intrigued with the plant that I wasn't even worrying about if where I had put it was the correct place. So over time, obviously this plant started to deteriorate and ended up dying. So then a couple years later, I got another one. I did the exact same thing, and guess what happened? It died. So a couple more years later, when I was about 15 or so, I bought another one. And this one, it grew, but it struggled a lot because I still wasn't following these 6 tips. Now, I developed these 6 tips off of my own experiences with growing Venus flytraps. Whenever I get a Venus flytrap, I look at where I had bought it and what conditions it was growing in before I actually get the plant. That's why it's very important that you ensure that you get your plants from a reputable grower or a reputable nursery who actually knows how to look after the plants properly. So the first most important thing for growing your Venus flytrap is the sunlight, or the amount of light which you actually give to your Venus flytrap. If you had a Venus flytrap and it was growing in a dark nursery somewhere, you can rest assured that it has been growing in a dark area. So you must take your Venus flytrap and get it used to growing to more sunlight. This is because Venus flytraps love sunlight. They love sunlight. They grow in North and South Carolinas, and in North and South Carolina, they live in marshlands, in wetlands, where there's a lot of direct sunlight for 8 to 10 hours per day in summer. So when you get your first Venus flytrap, make sure that where you got it from was looking after them properly. And if not, if it was growing in a dark area, slowly get your plant used to bright sunlight outside. That's the best place you can grow your Venus flytrap. Slowly acclimate the plant to the sunlight by moving it from an area of the same darkness as what it was from the place that you had originally bought the plant from, and move them into a slightly brighter area. For a week, you let it acclimate, and then after that week, you move it into an even brighter area until you've moved it into outside in a shaded area. Then after a week, into an area with dappled sunlight, and then after another week or a week and a half, you can put it out in direct sunlight. And after about another week, you can put it out into an area where it will stay for the rest of its life. An area full of sunlight, which is exactly what they need to grow and thrive and do really, really well. This leads us on to the second tip, temperature ranges. Venus flytraps grow in North and South Carolina, as I have previously mentioned. They are used to getting very hot temperatures in the summer and very cold temperatures in the winter. Up to 38 degrees Celsius in the summer and down to just below freezing in winter. Now keep it in mind, your plants can experience these temperatures, but they must not stay in those high and low temperatures for a long amount of time. If they are exposed to freezing temperatures for very long, they will die. And if they are experiencing very hot temperatures for a long amount of time, they will die as well. So ensure that if it is too hot, you move them into a shaded area. And if it is too cold, move them into a warmer area. Generally, when it's too cold, you can bring your plants from outside and keep them inside your house in a cool bedroom or in the basement or even in the garage. And if it is way too hot outside during the summer, simply moving your plants into a shaded area will give them the amount of cooler air that they need, but still give them the right amount of sunlight, as there's more sunlight seen in summer. Some people cover their Venus flytrap bogs in mulch if they actually aren't able to move the plants inside during very cold winters. Mulching your bog will give it a good amount of insulation against the cold. Maybe giving about 3 or 4 inches of mulch over the bog will help to insulate this just enough to keep the plants from freezing. Remember, they can stay at around 0 to 3 degrees Celsius. Just keeping them within that range will be fine for overwintering them while they are dormant. I will provide a link to the thermometer that I use for my plants so that you can track the temperature ranges in your growing environment. If you're unsure of the temperature ranges in your environment, I do recommend that you get a thermometer so that you can see how hot or how cold it does get in every specific microclimate that you grow it in. Now, the third most important tip with growing your Venus flytrap is dormancy. As I've just said, the plants go dormant in winter. So what exactly does that mean? When the sunlight and the temperature start to decrease in winter, the plant starts slowing down in growth. The Venus flytrap forms a white bulb underground called a rhizome and stores all its energy inside of that rhizome for the winter period. This just helps the plant conserve energy during this winter time so that they don't lose the traps or create leaves which will eventually not actually be used to the best of their capability compared to if they were used in summer. If they were used in summer, they get much more sunlight and grow much better. And remember, with the Venus flytrap, every single bit of energy that they get from eating an insect is very important to their growth. So ensure that you respect the winter dormancy for the Venus flytrap. When winter comes along, keep them outside if your climate can allow it, and let them go to sleep. They will go to sleep for around 4 to 6 months, depending on where exactly you stay in the world. For example, in Europe, it's much colder there than here in South Africa. So it really does depend on where you stay. But every Venus flytrap does need a winter dormancy. If you are staying in an area such as a desert, or you may be staying in a very hot tropical area where there isn't much of a temperature change or isn't much of a sunlight change between winter and summer, it may be recommended that you bring your Venus flytrap inside and put it into the fridge to give it a winter dormancy. Now, this does sound strange as there's bug-eating plants inside of your fridge, but trust me, many people do use this, especially people that live in the desert. This leads us on to the fourth most important thing about growing your Venus flytrap: watering. It is very important to give the plant the right type of water and the right amount of water. The right types of water include distilled water, reverse osmosis water, and rainwater. Now, the reason why we use these type of waters is that they have a very low mineral count. Naturally, in the North and South Carolinas, the Venus flytrap, which live in bogs and wetlands, have a slow movement of water going through these wetlands. Now, this movement of water causes any nutrients that do arise in the soil to be washed away, which causes the plants to get used to not having many nutrients to grow in. This is why they evolved a way to actually capture ways to collect nutrients through catching insects. So many of the carnivorous plants that you may hear about do live in very similar environments where there's very low nutrients. So the amount of water that you give your Venus flytrap is also very dependent on the season which you are currently in. The Venus flytrap needs more water in summer and less in winter. About 1 inch to half an inch in summer to about half an inch to a quarter inch in winter. In winter, you must let the tray dry out and then top it back up, whereas in summer, you must never let the tray dry out. This is very important to follow as naturally in the wild, the Venus flytrap is used to this fluctuation in water levels. So just mimicking this with the amount of water you give them is very easy to accomplish and will definitely help your plant in growing really well. Do bear in mind that the size of the pot that you use does actually dictate the amount of water which you will be providing your Venus flytrap. If you have a pot which is about 30 centimeters in height, about this tall, you will obviously need to give it much more water, a bigger water level. But if you are growing them in maybe 5 centimeter pots like this big, giving them 1 inch of water is not going to be very good for their root system and may cause them to rot away. So always try and ensure that you have the relatively correct amount of water per pot size. This pot size may just depend on your own environment, but ensuring that there's more water in summer and less water in winter is a very good way to guide you in that kind of direction. Now, the fifth most important aspect of growing your carnivorous plant is ensuring that the plant is in the correct media. When you first get your Venus flytrap from a dodgy nursery somewhere, they may have actually planted the Venus flytrap in the wrong type of media. This happens very often in my country. So what you will need to do is dig inside of the pot and make sure that the plant is growing in a peat-based mixture. A peat-based mixture is what many people do use to grow their Venus flytraps. Generally, it's a peat to perlite mixture or peat to sand mixture. Personally, I prefer to use a peat and silica mixture, as when you use peat and perlite, when you overwater the pot, or if they're kept outside and it rains and the pots fill up, the peat floats to the top, which gets rid of the whole need of actually using perlite, which is to aerate the soil and allow movement of water through the soil. So I personally use a ratio of 1:1 of peat and silica sand to provide the perfect ratio to allow the most water movement and oxygen aeration inside of the media without the silica sand moving if they get too much water. I'll provide links to the peat and silica sand that I recommend you use in the description below. Click on the link and you can just go to the page and purchase some if you need. Now, the sixth most important aspect of growing your Venus flytrap is obviously feeding them, right? We grow these amazing plants because they do something that no other plants can do. They eat insects. Now that begs the question, do we actually need to feed them? And the answer is no, we don't. The reason why these plants capture insects is because they need to supplement their growth. This doesn't mean that they need it. This supplementation means that they have what they need, but it does help to have it. So growing the plants purely in the mixture with very good sunlight, they will grow amazingly well. But every now and then, we may find a weird looking insect in our house or feel threatened by a spider that's lurking around our bedroom. So every now and then we can feed them, but you have to ensure that you feed them very irregularly. They do catch their own food. They've been doing this for a long time. So if you do find an insect, make sure that it is firstly alive. The trap has to be stimulated when you feed them. Secondly, do not overfeed the traps. Feeding them once every week is a good estimate, or once every 2 weeks is even better. And thirdly, never feed them human foods. Don't feed them beef. Don't feed them ham. Don't feed them chicken. Processed foods will get the traps to rot away and will damage your plant. So feeding them is not necessary, but obviously we want to do it. So we can do it, but just make sure you do it properly so that your Venus flytrap can grow really well. Time for the 3 bonus tips for today. Firstly, your microclimate. Everyone lives in a different climate, and subsequently everyone has a different microclimate. A microclimate is a small area in which you actually live in, where you grow your plants. My outside area is different to my lounge. Those are different microclimates. My bedroom has a different microclimate to my plants that I grow on my roof. So every single small spot has a different microclimate. This is why it is so important that you ensure that you have a good thermometer that shows you the highs and the lows for the day, so that you can gauge how well your plants will or won't do in your specific microclimate. The second bonus tip, overcaring. When I first got my Venus flytrap, I overcared for them. This led them to die. Especially when I got my second and third Venus flytrap, where I finally started to realize that, hey, these things do need specific care. I started to move them. I would take the plant from the kitchen and move it outside, and then I'd think, oh, this is too much sunlight, I need to move it back to the kitchen. Now the sunlight levels are constantly changing, and the plant can't get used to what I'm trying to provide it. The plant, just like everything, needs stability. It needs to get used to the environment which you are providing to it. So constantly changing every single small factor about the plant's growth will get the plant killed. So ensure that you look after your plants properly and ensure that you give them time to get used to the environment you're growing them with. Of course, by all means, stare at them for as long as you want. I did that. That didn't kill them, but constantly changing the environment does damage the plant. The third bonus tip, which leads on from the second bonus tip, is time. Things take time. You need to give the plant time to get used to the environment and time to actually grow. Your Venus flytrap won't go from looking from a dead piece of leaves to a stunning looking Venus flytrap in a month. It won't even take 2 months. Sometimes it will take up to 3 months for the plant to start doing really, really well and growing really, really strong. I still have some Venus flytraps which I brought from Europe upstairs with my plants, and it's taken them 6 months to get used to the new environment. So things take time, especially considering that the Venus flytraps have a dormancy period. That's a whole 6 months of inactivity, which you have to allow the plants to have. So time is a very important aspect which you need to take in consideration when growing carnivorous plants. Venus flytraps are one of the quicker growers of carnivorous plants. Compared to Nepenthes, for example, Nepenthes grow really slowly, maybe making one leaf every month if you're growing a very well-known Highlander plant. If you find this helpful, please give us a like, give us a subscribe, as every week I will be releasing educational videos and ways to help you grow and expand your carnivorous plants collection and your knowledge. Thanks guys, see you next time.